Alright, so now we're going to talk about color correcting. And in order to color correct and edit your photos, you're going to need Lightroom. So just go to the App Store, type in Lightroom into search, and it's Lightroom CC. This is what it looks like. Just download it and we'll get started. So when you open the Lightroom app, all you have to do is tap on the blue button in the bottom right and you can import a photo. I've already got one imported, so I'll just click on this one. So before you start dragging settings around like a monkey with an abacus, we need to talk about what they actually mean and how they affect an image. Feel free to adjust them individually as we go along. So if you click on the Light tab at the bottom, from here you have exposure, which is what brightens or darkens the image. And you have contrast, which is the difference between light and dark areas in your image. You can harshen the difference or neutralize it depending on which way you drag the adjustment. If you drag it to the right, the highlights will get a little bit brighter and the shadows will get a little bit darker. And if you drag it to the left, it kind of flattens the image. And you have highlights. These are the lightest parts of your image, typically where the light hits the harshest. Dragging the slider to the right can boost your highlights more, and dragging it to the left can reduce the highlights, sometimes even uncovering more detail. If you look in the mountain, when I drag the highlights all the way to the right, a lot of those white areas get pretty blown out, which can be a cool effect if that's what you're going for, but drag it to the left and there's a lot more detail. And you have the shadows. These are the darker parts of your image, typically where there's a lack of light. Dragging the slider to the left can darken those shadows if you look in the trees. And dragging to the right can lighten them up and really expose a lot of detail in those trees. And you also have blacks and whites. This is the total black limit and total white limit in your image. When you set the blacks all the way to the right, you're changing how much black value is allowed to exist in your image. And when you drag to the left, you greatly increase that black value. I typically don't change the blacks or the whites very much unless I just want a little bit of an extra boost in highlights, but that'll just depend on what type of image you're editing. I really like the blown out sky look on my images, so sometimes I add just a little bit of extra white for this. Okay, now click on the color tab. I've picked a different image because I want to explain temperature. Temperature is what changes the photo warm or cold depending on your preference. But to fully utilize temperature, you have to understand white balance. White balance is basically the tint color on your photo caused by certain lighting conditions. A lot of older bulbs, when you're shooting inside, emit a very orange color, while newer fluorescent lights emit more of a white and blue color. The same goes for if you're standing in the sun versus standing in the shade or looking into a sunset. So your shots may come out very orange or very blue depending on what type of lighting is present. Temperature is the fix for this. So if your image is too orange, just add a little bit more blue and you can neutralize the image. If your image is too cold, you can add a little bit more orange and neutralize it that way. This image in particular is warm, so I would add a little bit more blue to expose that blue sky. Unless you really like the orange look. Again, it's all depending on your preference. So next we have tint. This is the fine tune for the temperature adjustment. Again, using this adjustment will depend on what lighting conditions you're shooting in. It isn't just the pink or green slider. Certain lights emit certain hues, and a hue is a shade of color. And the tint adjustment is just another way to neutralize this. So if your image looks a little too pink, give it some green. If your image looks a little too green, give it some pink. Again, it's to neutralize, not just to add green or pink. Next, we have vibrance and saturation. I have to go over saturation first. This is the overall intensity of the colors in your shot. Dragging the slider to the right can greatly boost the colors, while dragging to the left can reduce them and bring them closer to a black and white value. Now, vibrance is an intelligent adjustment to boost the saturation of weaker colors and leaves the more saturated colors alone. So, if you notice when I drag vibrance, the orange doesn't pop nearly as much as it did with the saturation slider. This is because it recognizes that the orange is already very saturated, so it doesn't boost it too much more, but it does boost other surrounding colors. Now let's talk about my favorite color correction feature ever. It's the mix button. It's still in the color tab at the top right. Just click mix. This feature allows you to change individual colors. You can change the hue, which is the range of color, the saturation, and luminance, which is the overall lightness of that color. This sounds a little confusing, so the best way to explain it is just to do it. Take this photo of a mountain that I took out at Mount Rainier. If I wanted to just change the blues in this photo, I'd just click on the blue dot. From here, I can change the color of this blue with the hue slider. So if you want to add a little bit more green to the blue or make it a little more purple, you can. Just depends on your preference. But I'm only affecting the blue. I think I'm going to add just a little bit of green to this to get kind of a cyan color. Next, you can drag the saturation slider to the right to boost the color's intensity. So really blue or kind of a dead type of blue. It just depends on the style of photo that you're going for. But again, I'm only affecting the blues. Lastly, I can drag the luminance slider to the right to brighten the blues. So this kind of takes the highlights in those blues and makes them lighter or darker. But again, only on the blues. So you can do this with any color. This is another photo that I took out in Seattle at Snoqualmie Falls. I could pick the oranges and I could make them more red. I could bring them back to a yellowish green. Just all depends on what you're going for. Really, the best way to figure out what you like is just to drag them left and right and see what style you want. Okay, so now click on the Effects tab at the bottom right. From here, you've got Clarity. This is what boosts the contrast in only the midtones of your photo. This is just a fancy way of saying that it gives your photo an extra punch. It's best not to go too overboard with this effect. And if you go the opposite way, it gets very soft. I like to just add just a little bit to give it just a little bit of an extra boost. You've also got dehaze, which decreases fog and background haze. So if you take a photo at early morning when there's a lot of cloud coverage, you can use this to decrease that. And obviously dragging to the left kind of makes it even more foggy. You've also got vignette amount. A vignette is the darkening or brightening of the image corners. It helps you draw focus to the center. You can drag it to the left and get a dark vignette, or you can drag it to the right and get a whiter vignette. And you can also change the midpoint, which is just what changes how close to the center you want the vignette to be. So I can bring it out, or I can bring it way in. The feather is what changes the amount of fade on the vignette. So you can drag the slider to the right and get a very big feather, or you can drag it left and get a very sharp vignette. And you also have the roundness, which is what changes the shape of the vignette. So you've got more of a circle and more of a square, which kind of adds this old photo look to it, which I kind of like. There's a few more tabs, like detail, where you can sharpen your image. You can also reduce noise, which is basically like looking into a snowy television set. When you drag it forward, it kind of blends the pixels, making it more smooth. You really don't need to worry about the optics tab. I've never actually found a use for this. And you can actually apply presets where you can click on creative, black and white, or color. Let's just go with creative for the sake of the example. And you can apply different presets that Lightroom has already made. And this is applying them on top of my effects. So typically, if you're going to apply a preset, I would do it before you start changing everything. And you've got more with black and white, different types of black and white, as well as color. You can also crop your photo by clicking on the crop button, which also has a rotation in it. So if you take a photo that's a little off axis, you can straighten it back out, or you can drag to only a certain part of your image. If you go all the way to the right, you can reset your image by clicking on all, and it just goes back to the way that it was. When you're done, all you have to do is click on the box with the arrow up at the top right, and you can share it, you can save it to your camera roll, save to a certain file, or open it in other apps. Usually what I do is just save to camera roll, and I do maximum available. And if you like the settings that you've applied on a certain photo, just click on the 3 dots at the top right corner, and you can copy these settings, and it shows everything that you've changed. Just hit OK to copy all, and you can go to any other photo, click on the same 3 dots, and paste those settings on a new photo. You can also back up your photos on the cloud by clicking on the cloud with the green dot. And the button at the top middle is just an undo button. If you've taken a lot of photos in one day, you can go to the top left and click on Rate and Review. And this allows you to swipe through your images, and you can swipe up to flag it as good, swipe all the way down to flag it as a bad photo or neutral. And you can rate it by clicking on the stars and swiping all the way up. You can go back and click on this top middle button. It kind of looks like the tip of a pen, and you can sort your photos based on photos, or if you've got videos, you can do just videos, and you can pick unflagged, picked, and rejected photos depending on how you rated them. But they'll all turn white if you click them all, so you kind of have to uncheck. So if I just want picked, picked is the only one that's highlighted white. Lastly, you can click on keywords, and this allows you to add keywords like, let's say, mountains or trees, or you could do, let's say, dark shadows, and add keywords like this so that when you have a ton of photos uploaded in Lightroom, you can go to the search bar and just type in what you want to find, and it'll take you to all the images that you've tagged. So that is it, guys. Welcome to Lightroom, and start playing with some of your photos.